Welcome back everyone. Today we're making a snapback bucket hat. We're taking the classic look of a bucket hat and integrating an adjustable back. This is a super easy project for all skill levels, so if you're new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need a 1/4 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all very durable and they're easy to work with. I'm going to be using a medium weight printed canvas. I found that this material works super good and it made for a nice lightweight hat for the summer. But like always, get creative with it, test different fabrics, and find a fabric that really makes your design come together. You'll need 4 eyelets, and these are going to be used for the vents on the side, and you can pretty much get any size. It really comes down to preference on how you want it to look. You'll need 1 sweatband, and you can get your sweatbands off of capsupplyco.com. They're millinery grade and it really makes for a professional finished product. You can choose to make your own sweatbands, but I highly recommend finding one that's pre-made if you plan on making and selling these hats. You'll need 1 back closure kit, and there's a bunch of different styles you can choose from. You can go with a poly snapback, a nylon clip, a leather strap back. There's a ton of different options you can choose from for the back closure. You just want to make sure you get something that's adjustable. And again, you can find all your hat making supplies on capsupplyco.com. They have a wide variety to choose from, so you can definitely find something that works with your fabric. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, and you're ready to go. And real quick, before you cut out the pattern, you're going to want to check the scale at the top to make sure you printed the page to the right size. Because when you're working with hats, if you don't print it to the exact scale, it might turn out the wrong size. So just double check that before you cut it out. And after you gathered all your supplies and printed off your pattern, it's time to move into cutting. After choosing the size, checking the print scale, and determining what brim width you want to use, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. Before cutting out the fabric, I want to show you how you can make adjustments to the pattern for your style and fit. The first thing we're going to do is look at the height of the side panel. This can easily be adjusted by moving the top edge of the panel so you can make it taller or shorter. The easiest way to do this is to cut the top edge directly on the seam allowance. Then we're going to use that seam allowance as a template to make adjustments. So if you want to make it shorter, we're going to move it down, line it up with the top edge, mark that spot, and then cut that mark. And the same goes if you want to make it taller. We're going to move it past the top edge, add paper in between, tape it together. Then you'll have a taller side panel, and you're going to repeat this for the opposite side panel. The goal is to keep the curve of the top edge so that way the circumference matches up with the top panel. The second adjustment we're going to look at is the band panel, and this is the easiest one to make adjustments to. Since this panel is flat and has no curve, all you have to do is change the height and you don't have to cut off the seam allowance. And when it comes to sewing on a bigger band panel, all you have to do is line it up with the bottom edge and you're good to go. And again, any adjustments repeat for the opposite band panel. The final adjustment is for the brim panel, and this pattern actually comes with 2 different size brims. You have the shorter one like I used in the video, and then you also have a wide one that's more like a standard bucket hat. If you don't like either of those, then we're going to do the same thing we did for the side panel. Cut off the bottom seam allowance and add or subtract to the panel. Keep in mind the top edge length cannot be changed, so when it comes to the back brim panel, you're going to have to taper it up so it's the exact same width. This will ensure the brim stays the correct length and will wrap around the crown perfectly. It may take a little bit of playing around with, but it's really fun to make these adjustments so you have a one-of-a-kind bucket hat fit just for you. Moving on to cutting, you should end up with 1 front side band panel cut out of your main fabric. To complete this pattern and make sure it's the right size, you're going to want to overlap the pieces on the overlap area. Next, you'll need 2 back side band panels cut out of your main fabric. 4 back brim panels cut out of your main fabric. 2 front brim panels cut out of your main fabric, and then we're going to cut this one on the fold. 1 backside panel cut out of your main fabric, and this one's also cut on the fold. 1 front side panel cut out of your main fabric on the fold. And lastly, 1 top panel cut out of your main fabric, and this one you're going to want to mark the sides and the center after you cut it so you have the right orientation when it comes to use it. Moving on to assembly, we're going to grab both of the brim panels, the front and the back. Separate the front brim panels with right sides facing up. Using the pattern, locate the attachment area. And this is where we're going to line up the front brim panel with the back brim panel. So place the right sides together, lining up the side edges, and then we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Keep in mind it's very important to get this at the correct seam allowance or else the brim might not wrap around the crown and fit correctly. Open up the panels, locate the seam allowance, and you can fold that seam allowance to the left or the right, and from here we're going to add a top stitch. I like to match my top stitching with the opposite brim panel, so if I did right on one side, I'm going to do right on the opposite brim panel. Place the right sides together, lining up the outside bottom edge. Since this is a curved edge, it's going to want to stretch as you sew it, so the best way to prevent it from stretching is add a few pins along that outside edge. This will keep the 2 layers from shifting around, and then we're going to stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take your time with the stitch, but also try to do it in one go because any start and stop could add a little point and prevent the brim from being perfectly curved once you flip the right sides out. Again, it's important to get the correct seam allowance on those outside edges or else that circumference is not going to fit correctly around the crown. And then we're going to flip the right sides out and press it down. So if you're wondering why I'm not adding interfacing to the brim assembly, it's because that this fabric was heavyweight enough. Because once you add all the brim stitches, it really stiffens up the fabric and makes it look more like a bucket hat brim. So if you're on the edge, I do recommend adding the brim stitches before you make your choice, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to need the interfacing and it will look fine. But if your fabric is super lightweight, then I recommend going with a medium weight interfacing. This will give you enough stiffness and you're going to only apply this to one of the brim panels and 2 of the back brim panels. So essentially you're only doing it to 1/2. And again, this is all dependent on what style of fabric you are using and also how you want your brim to feel. I want mine to be a little bit more loose than stiff, so I'm going without the interfacing. Just like in the previous step, we're going to place pins around the outside edge so the fabric doesn't move as we're sewing it. Then simply start at the outside edge and move in 1/4 inch with every stitch. Realistically, you can move the stitch in any increment and add as many brim stitches as you would like. I like to add them all the way up to the top edge so that way the entire brim is covered. As you can see, after adding the stitches, it really brings out the bucket hat look in the brim, and this is really true for with most fabrics I have worked with. So like I said before, if you are on the fence with adding interfacing, I recommend trying out your fabric first and seeing how it looks finished. But other than that, it's going to complete our brim assembly, so for the moment we can place it off to the side and grab both the back side band panel and the front side band panel. Separate the panels with right sides facing up. Using the pattern, locate the hem guide at the top of the panel and roll the edge over 1/4 inch. To keep it in place, press the hem edge for all of the panels. If you're using a fabric that's tricky to press, then I recommend using pins. After all the edges are pressed, you're going to want to flip them over and just make sure that they're all the same exact size. These bands are going to meet up on the side of the hat, so it's important that they're the same size so they line up. From here, we're going to grab the back side panel and the front side panel. Open up both of the panels with right sides facing up. Using the pattern, locate the side band panel placement guide, and this is where we're going to be placing the side band. It doesn't have to line up perfectly with the placement guide, it just has to line up with the bottom edge. Go ahead and repeat this process for the opposite side panel and side band panels. Before you start sewing, it's best to place a few pins so the layers don't shift around, then we're going to stitch the top edge of both panels. Sometimes as you're sewing, one of the layers might get pushed a little bit and it might not be the exact same size, but that's no worry as long as the panel you can snip the outside edges so they line up perfectly. For the next step, we're going to grab the pattern, place it over top of the panel, locate the eyelet placement guide, mark it out with chalk or pencil. Reflect the pattern over the center and mark out the eyelet placement guide on the opposite side. I'll be using a standard 2-piece eyelet with a hammer die. Feel free to change up the installment method and the eyelet size. To install them, you want to punch the hole to the size of your eyelet, place the eyelet through the opening, flip the fabric around to the wrong side, add the backing, place the base of the die on the right side of the eyelet, which will be on the right side of the fabric, insert the opposite side of the die into the back and hammer it down. Then go ahead and repeat this step for the rest of the eyelets. And these are going to be the eyelets on the side of the hat. You don't have to use eyelets. If you have the equipment, you can do a circle buttonhole or use an embroidery machine. This next step is optional. I'm going to be adding a logo on the front using my embroidery machine. I find it's easiest and best to do it at this stage while the fabric is sitting flat. It also makes for a nicer finished logo because the fabric is not curved and you don't have to work it around the embroidery machine. So if you plan on making a lot of these hats, you want to quickly stop at this stage, add all your logos, and then we can move on to the next step. But again, this is optional. It's only for adding embroidery or patches, so if you're not adding any of those, we can move on by placing the right sides together, lining up the outside edges, and stitch both of the side edges at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just like with the brim panels, it's very important to get that 1/4 inch seam allowance correctly or else the top panel circumference won't fit right on the top edge, along with the brim panel on the bottom edge. And you can quickly line up both panels at this step before you move on, de-thread, re-sew, and make it right. For this next step, we're going to be adding bias tape and a top stitch to the side edges to cover up those raw edges on the inside. I'm going to use a bias tape binder, but if you don't want to use a binder, you can also do this by serging that inside edge and adding a standard top stitch. The binder I'm using is a double fold bias tape binder and it's used with a double needle sewing machine. But don't worry if you don't have a double needle sewing machine, I'm going to show you a method that you can use with a regular domestic sewing machine. Start by replacing your needle with the twin needle. I'll have this needle linked in the description, and this needle works on all domestic machines. Switch your machine to zigzag stitch, your choice of length, and a 0 width. Thread your machine the same way, but add 2 spools of thread. Be sure to thread through both of the needles and add your binder. It's best to have the bias tape already in so you can line it up with the needles. And I found the easiest way to do this is just tape it down. And once you have it installed, give it a quick run to make sure all the stitches are looking good. Grab your front panels and place that seam directly in the center of the binder and stitch all the way through. And just like that, it's going to add a double top stitch on the front and cover the back seam. If you want to speed up the process, I recommend looking into a dedicated double needle sewing machine. This is going to cut production time in half and give you a perfect bias tape on the inside and perfect stitches on the outside. It's something really to consider if you plan on manufacturing these at a higher volume. When it comes to the bias tape, I recommend using as light as weight fabric as you can find. But anyways, moving on, we can slide this panel forward, grab the top panel, and if you haven't done so already, the first thing you want to do is mark the side edges and the center points. And do the same thing for the side panel assembly, but the side seam should be the side one, so you only need to mark the centers. Then we're going to flip the wrong sides out and place the right sides together, lining up the sides and the centers. Stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and again, this is a curved edge, so you want to place pins so the fabric doesn't stretch and become offset. Trim the bias tape flush with the seam allowance and do the same if you have anything else sticking out past the seam allowance. Then we're going to flip the right sides out and add our bias tape and top stitch to that new seam. This is the trickiest one because you're working on a curve, so just take your time and give yourself a little bit extra after the stitch. Because we're going to take that end, fold it over twice, line it up with the bias tape, and stitch it down. I'm going to be stitching this from the inside so I can see what I'm doing, so my bobbin I'm going to change to the color of my outside fabric. This is going to help hide that stitch on the outside so it's not as noticeable. But if done correctly, you should have a nice clean bias tape strip on the inside, and then you should have a little tack stitch on the outside. I like to put this towards the back of the hat so that way it's in the back and out of sight. For this next step, we're going to clean up the back opening, and there's a few different ways you can do this. You can fold that end inward and hem it down, but I'm going to be adding a double fold bias tape, and I'm going to walk you through a few different ways you can do this with minimal tools to advanced. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. Using this attachment really speeds up the process, and it allows me to use the same fabric for the bias tape. Just like with the double needle sewing machine, if you plan on making a lot of these, it's something to look into. Moving on to the next step, grab the brim assembly, and we're going to be placing this around the bottom edge of the crown. Before you place it, you want to determine the right and the wrong side. I'm using the same color fabric for both sides, so it really doesn't matter. But if you're using two different colors, then the right side will be on the outside, and we're going to place the right side lining it up on the bottom edge with the back, and then also with the center front. If everything was sewn together correctly with the right seam allowances, then the back edge of the brim panel should line up with the back edge of the opening. Place pins all the way around the bottom edge so the fabric doesn't shift, and then we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It may take a few tries to really get this perfect, but all you have to do is de-thread it and try it again. Flip it around to the right side. If you're consistent, that band should be the same size all the way around the outside edge. And at this point too, you can kind of try it on, test out the width of the brim. If you don't like the size of it, you can de-thread it and make a new one. Next, we're going to be adding the sweatband, and I'm using a millinery grade sweatband from capsupplyco.com. I like buying these pre-made because they're built to last and they feel nice, and it gives it a professional finished look. When it comes to adding the sweatband, we want to attach it to the seam allowance on the inside bottom edge of the crown. If you sew past the seam allowance, then you risk sewing more of the brim to the crown and throwing off the side band width. You also want a couple inches of sweatband hanging off the back edge. Before you start sewing, remove the base of the sewing machine to turn it into a cylinder bed. This will allow the hat to spin around the cylinder bed and making it easier to stitch. If your machine doesn't have the option, you can still do it without. For the next step, we're going to move to the back opening, roll the sweatband inward so it's a nice clean edge, and then we're going to roll it up and line it up with the back edge. What we're going to be doing is adding a top stitch on the outside bottom edge of the side band panel. So you want to pull the brim panel out as much as possible and have the sweatbands perfectly flat on the inside. Once you have both the sweatbands folded inwards and the brim pulled down, we're going to add a top stitch along the entire bottom edge of the side band panel. As you can see, the stitch really pushes that sweatband and flattens it out on the inside, and then it defines the side band panel on the outside. It kind of gives the illusion that there's an extra band in between the side panel and the brim panel. To finish off the hat, we're going to add the adjuster on the back, and you can really pick from any style adjuster. You can go leather strap back, plastic snapback, or a nylon clip. For this specific project, I'm going to be using the leather strap back, but they're going to be installed the same way, so if you are using a plastic snapback, you're going to fold the sweatband inward, place it in between the sweatband and the outside edge, and stitch it down. And repeat that process for the opposite side of the plastic snap. The same goes for the leather strap. We're going to place it in between both the sweatband and the outside fabric. Line it up with the bottom and stitch it down. And then we're going to stitch down the opposite side too, because we're going to be adding a buckle on that side. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that you want that strap to be parallel with the sideband panel, so that way when it's across to the other side, it's not going to be offset so it doesn't fit weird. To add the buckle, we're going to pull the strap to the opposite side, see where it falls, and then we're going to place the buckle right in that spot. You can either mark this out with chalk, or you could just punch it directly through the opening in the buckle. We are going through all the layers, including the sweatband, because we want that buckle to be very secure, and the best way to do that is to use a lot of layers as stabilizer. Place the eyelet through the opening so the right side of the eyelet is on the sweatband side. Feed the opposite side of the eyelet through the buckle opening and then press it down. I'm using a die press for this step. Feel free to use a die press, a hammer press, or pliers. After installing it, slide the leather through the buckle and just double check to make sure that everything is lined up. Mine is a little bit offset, but it's not that noticeable. And from here, you can add your oval eyelet, but that band is in the way of where mine would set, so I'm just gonna skip that for now. And the oval eyelet would be the opening that leather strip slides into, so the end's not sticking out. For the final step, add your branding. And again, I did this in previous steps with the embroidery, but I also added leather tags, just to show you that you can still add the branding at the end when the bucket hat is complete. If you're wondering about the leather strips, I added those with double-sided rivets. Go ahead and try it on, see how it fits, and you can always make adjustments for future hats to really customize it to your style. Like I said in the beginning, you can play around with the brim width, the side panel height, the sideband height. All of these will change the overall shape and look of the hat to make it custom for your measurements and style. So have some fun with it, get creative, and make a next level bucket hat that works for you. And there you have it, your snapback bucket hat is complete. This is a fun pattern that you can test out different fabrics. You can change up the brim size, the side size, and really customize it to your style. Like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.